Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Margaret Impraim. This is an event organized by the Youth Climate Council Global Alliance and the Body Shop. Basically, this event is to help us understand more about the need for youth climate councils. So, in the fight for climate change, we all know that there is a need for collaboration. In the youth sector, we have the youth climate councils that have been springing up all over the world, particularly in the global south. And we want to understand the power behind this and the need to make sure there are more of these councils, even in the global north and even beyond. So we're going to have two sessions. The first session is going to just talk more about why the youth involvement is important and what can meaningful youth involvement look like. And for this session, we have three speakers. Our first speaker, gentleman, is Joshua Amponsem, who is the climate lead of the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. And the second speaker is Elise Mazzola, who is the global head of activism for the Body Shop. A little bit about Alice. Alice was appointed global head of activism at the Body Shop in July 2020. With her team, she sets strategy and provides support to activism teams in every country that the Body Shop is present as they plan and implement locally relevant activism campaigns on a range of different social and environmental justice issues. She currently leads the global activism campaign Be Seen, Be Heard in partnership with the United Nations Youth Envoy, which aims to increase young people's participation in politics and public decision making. The 3-year campaign will ensure that all the Body Shop markets have a local not-for-profit campaign partner and a plan to advocate for policy or legislation change in that country. Prior to joining the Body Shop, she worked in government in Australia and the not-for-profit sector in the UK and Middle East, focusing on human rights, social justice, equality, and good governance. Her specialty is the monitoring and evaluation of impact of social projects, and this brings not-for-profit experience to the business environment and to the Body Shop's campaign work. Our third speaker is Naya. All right, so Naya Marta, right? Great. Naya is the lead for a lovely organization that she'll talk more about. Great. So just to start with, Josh, would you begin by telling us what a Youth Climate Council is and what it does?
Thank you very much. Youth climate councils are basically structures that have been developed to allow the youth climate movement at a national level to work closely with their governments. It can take form in different forms and shapes, but basically the underlying factor here is that governments struggle to work with young people because of our diversity. You have young artists, you have students, you have young researchers, you have informal workers, you have unemployed youth. So the different groups of young people could make it very difficult for a government to effectively consult with all the different kind of groups and bring their input into policy. And this is why the idea of a youth climate council, we thought about this back in 2019 when the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth held the first Youth Climate Summit. I'm a climate activist. I work for the UN, but I'm still an activist. And during that time, we talked about, so there are some of us at the conference who are very keen on policy, and the UN does most of their work on policy. But there are also other young people who like to strike and who want to protest, and that is how they demonstrate their form of activism and frustration with climate inaction. And there are others who want to organize a flash mob. There are those who write research papers. So there are different ways that young people communicate about concern for the lack of inaction on the environment. But how do we make sure that regardless of whether you are writing a policy paper or you are protesting, your input actually reaches policymakers? The second part of the reason why we did this was that governments in many places in the global south specifically tend to consult with youth groups that are closer to them, closer to the ministry. So if the capital is, say, Cairo, the ministry most likely will engage youth groups that are based in Cairo because it's a logistical challenge to bring those who are in last mile communities to consult with them and bring their input into policy. So this was the second principle that the Youth Climate Council wanted to uphold, which is how do we make sure that young people, whether in the city, youth organizations, whether in rural areas, all of their inputs are equally represented in policy making. The third part was resource solidarity. How do we make sure that those who have access to certain resources do not just keep it to their chest because they have easy access? And how do we ensure that they can actually not be gatekeepers, but open the door for others who do not have reach to those positions? So this includes access to financial funding in many countries. This includes access to contacts within ministry. This includes access to, say, the negotiators at the national level. And our key role was that we want to make sure that those who have that access can work in support of others who do not have access. So these are the three fundamental principles of a Youth Climate Council, and they are in different countries in different forms of shape. But in all the councils, this has been something that they embody. And the primary line here is that how do we ensure that young people have a decision-making power? And the only way to ensure that is if they are involved in the decision-making process, not just at the end where they consult with them, but really from the beginning throughout the whole process to the end. And because government cannot do this with everybody, every young person in the country, the council consolidates all those inputs, work with the ministries throughout the whole process to make sure that their voices are actually reflected, and then communicate back to the community as a youth movement to say, we met with them, we put your inputs forward, this was not possible, but this was possible and it's been integrated.
Josh. So to you, Naya, you're the leader for Changemaker in Norway. I just want to find out from you if you have any similar thing from what Josh is saying in your country, because I heard that the Nordic Council, suggests to nationalities in the Nordic sectors that they should also have such council like what Josh was saying. Do you think that is a good thing in your direction in terms of climate action in your country as well? So let us know if one, you have such a similar thing in your country, Norway, and two, if you think it is an important and necessary thing in your country. Is it a step in the right direction?
I definitely think it's a very important thing. In Norway, we have a lot of youth organizations with very strong ties to the government, as in being able to protest and demonstrate, but also being invited into the meetings and in all those processes. So a youth council would definitely be a more, maybe even more arranged and inclusive way of doing it. But I do see very similar principles and values in the way that we already organize and have very close contact with the government and the policy makers and decision process.
You have one in your country?
What?
Do you already have a council in your country?
No, we don't. We don't have a council like that, but we are invited, or as organizations, to all of the relevant decision processes, which is kind of the same, but not really all the same.
So let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, if you say that from today you're going to have such an institutionalized movement in your country, how excited would you say you will be? And why would you be very excited to have the arranged, like you said, and a more effective council working with the government?
Well, I think it would be good to have a youth council, maybe to try to make it more or less person dependent, maybe, that you already have this setup where you would meet with the politicians and be a part of the decision process. But but I'm just open to hear and listen and learn, and that's my role here, I feel like.
We're really hoping to have a council in the Norway very soon. All right, Alice. So you're from the private sector. What are your thoughts about generally youth climate councils, and how do you propose to make youth involvement more in the private sector? Do you even think it's possible to have such a model?
Absolutely. I mean, in short, we love the idea, and I think for us at the Body Shop, we're borrowing heavily from this idea ourselves. So for those who are not familiar with the Body Shop, we're a cosmetics company. We're fairly well established. We're 40 years old, but I like to think that we're all young at heart. But we are benefiting very much from a youth council from within already. So we have a youth collective, which is made up of 12 individuals who are under 30, 6 who are from inside the organization, and 6 from outside from other like-minded businesses, so other certified B corporations. And we're loving the model because we can get this fresh thinking, fresh perspectives all the way to our executive leadership so easily, and have these honest conversations, and it means that it future-proofs our business. But I mean, we are looking at the issue of youth councils. It's not just what we're doing from the inside. It's also about our ability to use our power on the outside. So the Body Shop is operating in 75 countries around the world. We have a regular customer base of about 30 million people around the world. So, and we want to talk to people about the things that we think are important. And we really believe in the issue of youth representation and making sure that youth are represented at all levels of government and make sure that their voices are heard. And we have a partnership with the UN Youth Envoy's office, and we've written this beautiful report. If anyone would like to read it, we can. Which talks about the challenge of underrepresentation of youth in public life and how we need more youth voices if we're going to be addressing some of the biggest challenges, including climate change. And so this campaign looks different in every country because every youth underrepresentation looks different everywhere. And we're really urging society to take on youth and have faith in youth. And we are actively campaigning in a range of different areas, including lowering the voting age around the world, but also removing barriers for young people to be voters, but also to participate as running for office, basically. But one of our key call to actions is the setup for formal youth bodies. And actually, we are doing this in Chile, we're doing it in Spain, we're doing it in Portugal, we're doing it in Greece. And I'm so thrilled to have representation from the Body Shop Greece and our partner in Greece, so Action Aid Hellas, who have been working really hard together to get youth councils set up in Greece, but also at the European Union level and across other member states. And if anyone is around tomorrow, we actually have a handover of a petition. So there's, I think we're at 103,000 signatures to hand over to a representative of the European Union. So we love it. We love youth councils. We want to see more. We think it's a brilliant model and couldn't be more enthusiastic about it, really.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So, Josh, you are in an established youth climate council in the global south, because there's the more like a pace setter in Ghana. How do you see the world where we have youth climate councils springing all over, not just global south or global north? You've seen it work in the global south. How do you view it? How excited, how hopeful are you to make sure this is going to, take place? Because we all want youth climate council, like Alice said, all over the world, in Norway, everywhere. How do you see the world looking?
No, so first of all, thanks for what you said. I think that in many places, governments are one way or the other engaging with young people in ways that they can, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a council. I think that the principles are what matters the most. So we could have a youth council, we might not have a youth council. The most important thing is, how do we give power to young people, and how do we make sure that their inputs are integrated into policy making? In terms of what the councils that already exist and how I see this moving forward, Denmark was the first to actually announce their climate council. And then, of course, we had the Netherlands had one, and then Poland had one. But these were all global north. It had a different framework. And within sort of this, the European Union and the EU area, the governance structure is a little bit different. So there was already some sort of appetite and interest to have a structure where governments could work better with young people. In the global south, the context is a little bit different. So when the Youth Climate Council in Ghana started, the process of thinking through how do we do this and set up a structure that fit the local context was the most important thing. And this is to say that we cannot copy climate council simply because they exist somewhere and replicate them everywhere, right? So we need to see what are the limitations, what are the opportunities, and how do we do this better. So I know that, for instance, in Poland, the council work very directly with the ministry, but they cannot take certain initiatives on their own. Everything needs the approval of the ministry, right? In Denmark, it is not a separately funded council, right? But they work closely with the ministry supports them and makes sure that whenever the consultation is needed, they get the support to do that, to bring that in. In the Netherlands, the council work from the outside. It's not necessarily integrated into the ministry. It's an outside entity that works to advocate on behalf of young people, but make sure that they work with a partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to ensure that within the political system, their input is being integrated. These are three different models. Same principles, three different models. I come from Ghana. When Ghana started the Climate Council, the most essential part was if we want to embody those three principles, they have to be funding available. You cannot bring people from up north to consult without having money to cover their transport, their accommodation, their feeding. You know, the economic situation is very different. So this element created another new structure, which is the council work both from the outside and from the inside. The outside because it has to independently fundraise to cover the cost of doing this consultative work. But from the inside because they need to follow certain principles of the ministry as a political system to get their input in the right place. So for me, the future of youth climate councils in places like Brazil, where we are also operating, and Brazil is a huge country, right? I mean, so how do we make sure that we can work there in a way that the inputs of young people can still have a place without also diluting what they're actually putting forward, but also appreciating that it's a difficult political context. So in Brazil, they started at a city level. In Sao Paulo, they started from there. Once they gain traction from there, they can learn the lessons there and expand. So for me, the future for youth climate councils is we need to keep learning. We need to keep learning how can we ensure that we can give political power to young people while also appreciating that context differs from place to place and empowering young people not to give up, to see progress, and encouraging them to understand the political system that they function within, that they can actually become policymakers. And the inspiration for me when it comes to this, and big part why many young people are a fan of the work that we are doing with the Body Shop from the Office of the Youth Envoy, is that we are constantly saying that young people are not participating in politics. They do not find it attractive. They do not want to be policymakers because they think that it's a machine that doesn't move. But if you don't understand the system, you cannot operate within it. And you're going to get it wrong. And eventually, we are going to be policymakers. Whether we like it or not, the next set of policymakers are the young people today. So there have to be an initiative, a system, a structure that is intentionally set up to get young people to be very much aware of the political system, how policies are drafted, how they are negotiated at an international level, but the implications also at the local level. And once they have that understanding, it put us in a better position that one day, when we are in that position, we can act in the interest of ourselves, but also for the next generation of young people and for the collective at large.
Enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing. Which means that even in creating councils or anything like councils, it's context specific in every country. That is one thing I'm taking from whatever you're saying. And that everyone is on board, both from the private sector, from the government sector, because like Josh said, at the end of the day, the next generation of policymakers are the youth. So they have to be interested, they have to be on board. So thank you so much. We're moving on to anyone here who has any comment, any question, anyone? Just a minute for some comments or questions from anyone.
I have a small question actually, because I'm not very familiar with this concept. So just how does it really work? How does it work in Ghana? How does it work in Denmark? What type of policy do you try to influence? There's so many different types of climate and environment and nature and everything. Like, how do you even start?
So the start of a council really has to come from the ministry, right? It's like we being here. Everything young people are saying here is great. We all agree. But at the end of the day, if the context of the country, if the negotiators do not agree with it, they're not going to do it. We can say all we want, we can advocate, we can speak on nice panels, say everything nice, please get all the clubs. At the national level, if the national government and the policymakers do not align with those needs, it's not going to happen. So the start of a council is the national ministry recognizing that it is a struggle to bring young people into our work. So we need to open up and help set up a structure that bring their input into us in a way that is constructive, in a language that is usable, and in a context where we can actually work with it. And I'll give you examples. At COP25 in Madrid, there was a meeting where we met with the Minister for Environment in Austria, and a lot of young people had a lot to say, right? But everything they were saying was not a language that she could use. So she kept going back to them. Tell me exactly what you want in the concept of, say, Article 6, right? What language do you want to see there? What do you want to put in there? Give me that thing that I can work with. And it wasn't there because everyone in that room was either a hardcore activist who want to use the most fierce language or something that really express what they feel. And that is great. But we need another group of people who can convert that into a language that policymakers can work with. So the ministry has to open up that door. The youth movement need to be able to come together to align their thoughts and set up their priorities. So for instance, in Ghana, the youth movement, they have their consultation and they say, okay, on agricultural policies, what do we want to see? What is the new language we want to put forward? And then they set up a meeting with the ministry and go and present that. If it's about energy, okay, what is the latest renewable energy policy? When is the next review date or year? How do we organize ourselves so that when it's time for review process, we are ready to submit our inputs? The National Adaptation Plan process recently started, is going on, and the council reached out to the ministry and said, how do we ensure that young people at the district level can contribute to the National Adaptation Plan? So the ministry says, okay, these are the dates for the consultation. Now it's your responsibility. We reserve, say, 3 seats for you. You bring the people in, they give that input. But if the national government is not open to the idea, it's going to be extremely difficult. Nothing is going to change. So most of our advocacy, even though we speak well in international platforms, my recommendation to young people all the time is most of the work needs to happen at home, not here. So at home, we need to build our relationship with our governments. I know that many young people don't like governments. I mean, I get it. The action we want and the speed we want it is not the pace that they can work with. But we have to work with them. And that relationship is what will make the changes we wish to see happen much faster.
How can you be a part of government if you don't see yourself in it as well? So like, how can you have the faith that they represent your best interests if you don't see people who look like you, right?
And that is why we need more young people in policy making, because then we can relate to it and we can see ourselves there and we can work towards that. Yeah.
I hope you're inspired to push this in your country, and we're looking forward to seeing councils in every Nordic part of the world. All right, this was our first section, which is why youth involvement is important and what can meaningful youth involvement look like. I hope we all have learned something from this. We're going to go to the next session, just some few seconds. So thank you so much, our speakers. Okay, so just a 1 minute break, just a 1 minute breather, just stretch a bit, and then we move quickly to the next section. Okay, so thank you so much again for your time. We're moving just straight into the next section. That is, how can we improve the role of the Youth Climate Councils? So in the first one was a general thing. We wanted to understand why there was a need for youth involvement in every sector, bringing everyone on board. This time around, we're looking at case studies from Youth Climate Councils. So these lovely people here are representatives of what it looks like to have a council in their country. They're going to speak a little bit about it. I'll start with our first speaker, Elise. Elise is a member of the Danish Youth Climate Council, and she's a climate activist. And our next speaker is Sarah Darcy. A little bit about Sarah. Sarah is a climate activist from Brazil who has been working with climate advocacy since 2017 as an international relations graduate student and later as a sustainability expert. She is the policy and research officer for the Youth Climate Council Brazil. Nice. And a campaigner at Mercy for Animals, an international NGO focused on building a more sustainable and fair food system. In 2021, she joined the biggest sustainability training program from People Global, being recognized as a sustainability leader, and she's also part of Youngo, co-leading Elcoy Brazil 2022. Her main passion is advocating for civil society representation and effective participation in the decision-making process for climate politics. And we have Josh here again, but this time around, Josh is coming from the political point of view because it's very important to know what the politician is speaking about. And he having very direct interaction with politics, he should be able to talk more about it, right? Lovely. So we'll just start with you, Elise. One thing is implementing the Youth Climate Council, and another thing is actually listening to the recommendations and voices of the councils. So, what you perceive your time in the council has been in your country? Has it been meaningful? What do you think? How has it been as a representative in your council in your country?
Yes, so maybe this require a little bit of background, like how is the Danish Youth Climate Council constructed? Like, what is our system? And so we are, some of the members represent organizations. For instance, I represent the biggest like green youth movement we have in Denmark in the council, and then we also have like other people who represent other parts of the youth, also parts that is not necessarily about climate, but also like the labor youth thing and other stuff. And then some of the members are just very specialized in some certain areas, for instance, agriculture or transportation or education. So we're a very good mix of people. And the structure is that we meet with the climate minister twice a year. And between these meetings, we make recommendations. I think they're very strong recommendations, also because we represent the broad youth. And then we also participate in conferences and, yes, do other stuff and try to involve the youth, and also host events for the Danish youth and hear their perspectives, so we can incorporate their perspectives into our recommendations that we make. And I think the idea about youth climate councils is so good. I think it's fantastic. And I'm very, very happy that we got this youth climate council implemented in Denmark back in 2019. I think it was 2018 maybe. But I think we still have a long way for it to actually have, it has a very large potential, but we're still not there yet. Because as I told you, we make very strong recommendations, and I think we're doing a very good job. But when we only have a meeting with the minister twice a year, I think, when we have the meeting, he seems very interested, and he also comments, I think that's a good idea, I think that's a bad idea, like what can we do with that and that. It's very constructive. But then after the meeting, what happens? We don't hear from him. We don't know what's going on. Is he even thinking about it, or is he just, ignoring it afterwards? We don't know. So I think we should have like more follow-up meetings, like, and also like just some more mechanisms to make sure that our voices are actually heard and our ideas that he says he likes are actually implemented. So we have to overcome these barriers. We also have some administrative barriers, as you talked about. Like, we have a very low budget, so we use a lot of time on doing a bureaucracy, administrative stuff, planning. If we have to go to a conference, for instance, we use most of the time on the practical stuff instead of the stuff we should be doing, like climate recommendations and the real climate stuff. We use time on booking the train, finding accommodation, stuff like that. It would be so nice if someone from the climate ministry could help us with that, but we don't have the needed capacity right now. I think they should make our budget much larger, and we are fighting for that. And I think it will come, but it's a slow process. And another barrier we see is that we only have meetings with the climate minister. But for instance, the two biggest emitters in Denmark right now are the transportation sector and the agricultural sector. And they have other ministries. We have another minister for agriculture and another minister for transportation. So we can't make recommendations on that because our climate minister would just say, that's not my table. And that's a very problematic, I think. So I think we should also find a solution on that, so we could also make recommendations on agriculture and transportation, and meet with those ministers also. So yeah, that are my ideas for improving our influence in the council.
Yeah, the same question actually goes to you. How do you feel about your time in your country as a council representative, and how has it been in terms of implementation?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? Hello, okay. Hi, thank you, Margaret. Yes, so I think that all youth climate councils share the same goal, that is to increase youth participation in the decision-making process for climate policy. But as Josh was saying before, each country has its own needs and structure. So in Brazil, we have two things that are more specific. So the first one, of course, being the size of the country. So we are almost a continent. So it's very hard for us to already begin at a national level. So this is why we decided to start at a city level, a local level. And another reason for this is also because you're probably aware that we have a federal government right now that is not really open for civil society participation in general. So we had to figure it out a way to start doing what we have to do, but with the capacity we had and with the people we had. So we found that the local level would be a good way to do it. And the second thing is that we have a bottom-up strategy. So in the case of Brazil, it's similar to what we have in Ghana. The civil society is the one proposing and defending the idea of a youth climate council. So right now we consider ourselves a popular council because we are still not institutionalized as a governmental mechanism, but this is the idea. So we have this dream scenario, probably with the change of our federal government, that we will have a climate secretariat, and maybe the Youth Climate Council could be under this person as an advisory group from youth. So this is what we are fighting for. But even though we have some challenges regarding how we can be institutionalized as a council, we are still having a lot of meaningful participation. So in terms of advocacy and lobby, the strategy we decided to do was focusing on legislators. So we are talking to legislative power in the city of São Paulo and finding out who has power and interest in our cause. So once we scale up to the national level, we already have some politicians that support the idea of a council. We are also working a lot in capacity building and movement building. So we have been doing some events. We had a launch event to bring closer the civil society organizations that already work with climate and youth. Because the idea of a council is, of course, to be a channel for them to participate. So we don't want the civil society organizations to feel like we are one more NGO. The idea is that we can help them to bring their demands to the government. So this is very important. We also co-organized Local COI Brazil, which was one of the initiatives we did together with other civil society organizations. We have been working a lot also in content and research. I think the biggest example for us were the elections we had last month. So we decided to prioritize this because it was, of course, very important for climate, not only in Brazil but in the world, that we could have good people being elected in this election. So we decided to start working on more political education content for young people and using our social media for this. So analyzing how governors are talking about climate change. We had some criteria and we were exposing those data so that young people could vote more conscious and looking for this as a criteria for them to choose who they would be willing to vote, not only at the national level, but also at a state level, because we also had state elections, and also regarding political parties. So I think that in general, to have a meaningful experience as a Youth Climate Council, we have to work with what we have, is what we have been doing. We couldn't start a national level right away, so we started at a local level. We are having problems talking to the executive power, so we are talking to the legislative power. I think that finding your way and starting from what you have, and also checking like what is missing in the climate advocacy scenario in general in your country, and trying to find a way to bring this content, bring these alliances that are not there yet, so we can actually have a meaningful impact as a council. And actually this morning I saw this quote that I thought was very particularly interesting for this panel, that is you don't have to dispute space, you have to expand space. So once you are there, you should not like dispute with other people, but make sure you can bring more people together. So I think that this is the basically idea of a council, for us to be able to bring more young people to the table and be this channel to open this space and the communication process with the governments. And each country will have its challenges, but we are figuring out our way in Brazil, and hopefully next year we'll be able to scale up at a national level too.
So much, Elise and Sarah, for sharing your baby steps in what your council has been doing in your various countries. So, Josh, you have had direct relationship with government based on what you're doing. From that perspective, what are the thoughts about youth involvement and interaction with politicians and the government, particularly the political stakeholders? And how can we make sure that these politicians actually listen to the recommendations? Because like what Elise was saying, recommendation, but as to if they do it or not, they cannot make sure they're accountable. What can we do to make sure that these politicians actually listen to the recommendations of the young people and also are being held accountable?
Okay, so thanks and congratulations to Sarah and to Elise for the work that you are doing. And I agree, you are all working with what the resources you have. So you're starting with what you have. I think that in many cases, governments, the structures we have largely do not necessarily mandate government to work with young people. So for many policymakers, it's extra work. That is the plain truth. It's extra work, so it comes as an extra burden, as something that they need to do. In the cases where there is even resource to work with young people, the idea that they have to be accountable to young people is very low. It's more or less, okay, we've met with them, we've taken their input, that is it. Can we go ahead and do the real work? This is typically how the thinking looks like. And I think that comes from two places. One place is that once the word youth lands on the table, anything around expertise is gone. It's young people and they have something to say. So with that thinking and that notion, it makes it really difficult for youth input to be seen as something that is coming from a place of expertise, and that has to be integrated properly. So that is the first challenge. Then the second challenge is the finance part. And I've been saying this for at least the whole of this year because I've been working with some philanthropic advisors. And what I say is that for every typical movement or organization, you start the year, you have your annual meeting or strategy for the year, you plan, you design, you have a plan for the year, you have a budget, you work with it. The youth movement has never had this. The youth movement always have to work in a very reactive way. Something happens, there's money, they react. If you look at the climate policy process, so many meetings happen from the start of the year until COP. How many young people get funding to go to those meetings? But once it is COP, there's funding literally like sparing up from everywhere. Apply to get funding to go to COP. There's accommodation subsidy. There is that subsidy. So we really do not allow the youth movement, the youth climate movement, to organize themselves effectively to be able to bring their input into the spaces where we are even giving them a seat. We expect them to show up and all of a sudden know all what their peers are thinking. So you put one person on the panel, you say they are representing the youth. How can they represent the youth if they've not had the time to convene a meeting, to convene a gathering, met with their colleagues to think about what are our priorities? So this has been, for me, the two things that really makes it difficult, because then for whatever thing the young person is saying, the policymaker is taking it as they are expressing their emotions, their feeling. They don't know how the system works. They don't get it. They are not an expert. So two ways to tackle that, and something that the Office of the Youth Envoy has been really keen on over the past years, was young people are experts in the things that concerns them. And no one can know it better than them. We've all been kids before, but believe me, time changes. Every kid thinks that the adult doesn't get what they are doing, what they are saying, what they are expressing. And until you really have that honest conversation, you will not understand what the person is going through. So that is the start. And then the second part is we need to start rewiring our thinking that young people are not here just to complain and demand. They are here with expertise, and we need to recognize them for that. So we should start changing the session of, say, when you have a panel, you say, oh, this is our youth speaker. No. What is that expertise that that person is bringing on board? And we need to refer to that expertise, because that is the only way the message from that person lands in the head of a policymaker as an expert input that has to be taken into consideration. And we need to unlock funding. We need to unlock funding for the movement, the councils, to be able to convene, to have several conversations, to follow the conversation from the start to the end. And not just, let's say, 2 times meeting with the ministry. But what resources do you have to meet with a broader group, to plan, to strategize, to set a long-term vision and work towards that vision? And I think, as from a policymaker perspective, there's a real challenge. Because imagine you are a policymaker, you meet with a youth group, right? And they claim they represent the youth movement. What do they want? They tell you, okay, you know, there's unemployment, we need access to energy, and we want, access to renewable energy, and we want, say, agricultural input to support our farming. Now, the next day, they go to another event, they meet another youth group, and they tell them, what do you want? We represent the movement. What we want is we want to catch up with the digital innovation that is happening globally, so we want all the investment to go into the digital age. As a policymaker, if you have 5 meetings in a week with different youth groups, you are hearing different things. At some point, you don't know what is the actual representation of the youth movement. And that is why I think that if we can work with policymakers, come together, have a system that allows the input to be a little bit coordinated. Because maybe those who are asking for the digital innovation and the digital age, maybe there's a strong element of that complement those who are asking for renewable energy. Maybe there's a new meter system that can be tracked with some technology. Maybe there's a new agricultural mechanism that can be done with technology. But the more we can really integrate all our inputs, coordinate it, and have a concrete submission that complements each other, policymakers will always struggle to work with us. Now, the second part is we also identifying ourselves as experts and not just presenting ourselves as youth so that we can be tokenized, or we can even open up the space and become more vulnerable to tokenization. So we need to be able to go to the table as, okay, I am an expert in, say, adaptation. I am an expert in climate finance. I am an expert in youth engagement in agriculture. I'm an expert in youth political participation. We need to go from that expertise and be able to work with our peers to get their insights and their experiences, so that when we get the seat at the table, we can represent them duly and they feel that they are heard. So when they meet with the same policymakers, they can reinforce what has already been said and not say something completely different.
Wow. Wow. It means that to have a youth climate council is one thing. Another thing is to make sure that they have the expertise so that the politicians can listen to them. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. Do we have any comments from any of our speakers?
Yes, I was just thinking about some things. I think that I don't know if this would work in any context, but what I'm missing from our meetings with the minister in Denmark is to that, because every time we make recommendations, we make them public on the website so everyone can read them. And it would be amazing if the climate minister had to position himself to these. So yes, we will do this. No, we will not do this. And if he just says no to it all, then it would be clear to everyone that he isn't listening to the youth. And then we could make a much bigger pressure, because right now it's not transparent if he listens to us or not, and we actually don't know ourselves if he does or not. We don't know if he takes it with him or not. So it would be very good to have some transparency in this. And the other thing I was thinking about another barrier in this collaboration, and it is that we cannot. We are an independent organization put down by the climate ministry, but they still fund us in Denmark. It's on the financial law they make every year, and the problem is, because maybe I'm also one of the more like radical persons in the council, but I'm like, we should go to the media, guys. This is not okay. And they're like, no, because then they will cut our funding. And that is like conflict of interest. It's very problematic, actually, that we cannot be too critical, because maybe they could, in theory, just remove us again. And that would be worse. So we have to find a solution for this also. So we should not be afraid of getting, our budget cut or getting removed or something. Yeah.
Should I just, okay. I understand your point, and I think it's very similar to us too. I think one thing that we are also trying to do and encourage is monitoring the policies that we already have, because the case in Brazil, we already have like climate policy action plans and adaptation plans, but the thing is, what is actually happening in like practical part. So I think that transparency is the key for us to be able to criticize without being like too activists, because of course the challenge in advocacy is always this, like you need to keep the conversation going, you need to keep the channel open, but you also have to be like true to what you are defending and to what young people actually think about. So if we want to be there bringing the input, we need to do it in a way that is transparent and in a way that is like based in data. We need to make this public because it's made for it to not be accessible at all. So it's good for them if people don't know what is happening. So there is a reason for this to be like not so transparent. So I think that we also have this role of making it public and making it in a way that we are database, and they cannot say anything if you're just saying, okay, you promised this and you are not doing. So what can you do? We are just showing the truth. So I think this is also our role as like part of the Youth Climate Councils.
That's why I also want to highlight actually this global alliance we have between the national youth climate councils, because we can learn so much from each other, and it's very nice talking about these same constraints that we have. Or actually I was very inspired by the collaboration they have in the Netherlands, because we made an event also in Stockholm where the minister was like, I'm so happy to have these young people help me, and they actually had gotten a lot of things through in the Netherlands, the Youth Climate Council there. And then I think we should keep the conversation going. Like, can we maybe take some of the things that works very well in the Netherlands in the Danish Youth Climate Council? So if you know any country that has Youth Climate Council and they're not in our alliance, you should tell them that we have this global alliance, because we can learn so much from each other and help each other. So that's good. Shout out.
Great. So my quick reaction to this is that clearly we need public accountability, and there has to be transparency around what recommendation goes in and what we really get as a feedback. Of course, monitoring and evaluation of anything at all requires some resources to do that. And to develop any system that can track this will require some human resource as well and some skill set as well. So things I think are needed now from the councils that exist: increased capacity building and resources to do that, dedicated budgets for the year so you can plan with it. And I clearly agree that in many cases, not just with councils, for every place I've been and I've worked, young people who work with governments, the only reason why they sometimes cannot even express their views the way they do is because of the fear that they would be cut off. They will not have access anymore. They will not have funding anymore. And I think the way to really resolve this is we need to start thinking around how can Youth Climate Council become more independent in their decision making, independent in fundraising, independent in how they want to organize themselves, but at the same time working in collaboration with the government. Because now it seems like there's a sort of dependency on the government because they can kick you out, which limits our political participation in that way. So that is something we need to figure out. But clearly, I think transparency, accountability, and this public mechanism should be there. And we can clearly advocate for a national budget that is fixed, that is set. And whether we agree or disagree with the government, this funding should be there. And our input should not be reliant on whether there's funding coming from the government or not. So absolutely agree on that. And I think as a collective, we can demand for that. We can ask for that. And we can build our capacity also in terms of how to use funding and how to use money. Because I know in many cases, there's also a bit of concern around, we cannot trust young people with this amount because they might misuse it. And I think that is a question of just building our capacity to be able to demonstrate our leadership on that. So thank you very much for the work you do, and I'm very happy to hear that. And I think, like you said, it's an open invitation to anyone who either is interested in setting up a council, setting up a structure like that, but also joining us in the advocacy of government working closer with young people to increase our political participation. Yeah.
Great. We have barely 2 minutes more. I'm just going to give 1 minute for any comment from anyone. Any comments, any question? Maybe you're inspired by this. You want to do something in your country. Any comment from anyone? Just in a minute. Okay. Great. So thank you so much. So this has been an event by the Youth Climate Council Global Alliance and the Body Shop. And we had 2 sections. So if you came here just now, you missed the first one, which was really very insightful. We had Alice from the Body Shop, we had Naya from Norway, and we had Josh right here with us. And the first was on why the youth involvement is important and what can meaningful youth involvement look like. And the second one, which we are here right now listening to, has been on how we can improve the role of the Youth Climate Councils. And I believe that we all have identified our uniqueness in our councils and also seen that there is a need to have an alliance that would have knowledge sharing, and so that someone's mistake will not be repeated somewhere else, because we all learn from each other and we have a very limited time to learn from mistakes. We have to make sure that we learn from others' experiences and get some lessons from there. So thank you so much, everyone. I have been your moderator. I am Margaret Impraim. I am the Capacity Building and Education Officer of the Youth Climate Council Ghana. And I'm really, really glad and really fortunate to be part of the Alliance. And I really encourage everyone to join us, because that is where you'll be able to learn from each other as councils and also develop your way of interaction with your government. Because as they all have said, it's context specific. So whatever you do might be different from what I do, but together we can know how we can all reach out. Okay, great. So we have 2 minutes. We would invite Mr. Michael here. Let's give it up for Mr. Michael. Mr. Michael is the COP24 president, and he has been a former environment and climate change minister. Mr. Michael, you're welcome. So just quickly, if you could just let us know what's your thoughts about youth involvement and having youth climate councils to, collaborate with the government as a politician.
Yes.
How can you involve?
So first of all, thank you very much for accepting me at this table. Not anymore a young person, not that much, but young in spirit. And I did my best in order to involve young people in climate discussion, because I think that we need sometimes to be a little bit shaken as older people. And so that's your role. But that's our role also, to help you understand where we go, what we do, and things happening, etc. So what we did in Poland is to select in a very transparent manner 2 representatives per voivodeship. Poland is a 40 million country, and so 32 young people from 16 voivodeship represented youth at the Ministry of Climate, and I was first Polish Minister of Climate, so I created the new ministry combining energy and environment. That was great, and that was also an occasion for me to create the first ever youth council in Poland and in Central Europe. I'm proud of that. I'm happy of that, and this being said, the future is in your hands right now. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're gonna have just a photograph if that's okay.